So, life at the hospital, the first round at the hospital. So, my daughter had her first surgery at 1 day old, and they put in her colostomy on that day. And as I mentioned in my first video, we were separated for the first 4 days. So the first 4 days, she was basically just on morphine, and they just kept her asleep as her body was healing and fighting the septic infection. So day 4, when I was able to finally reunite with her, we were able to see each other. She still wasn't eating anything and was hooked up to about a zillion different machines. And I was only able to tolerate about 20 minutes sitting beside her before my pain levels were just too high, and I had to go home, and I had to have ambulance transfers to and from the hospital. So it was tough. Day 5, I got to hold her, and that was big. That was like my first real time holding her, because I was conscious, I wasn't sick, and I was, oh my goodness, I was so happy. Get some goosebumps just thinking about that day. So I was able to hold her, and I held her for about 2 hours. I was in so much pain from sitting still, but I didn't care because I got to hold my daughter. That day as well, she got to have milk for the first time. And so she had a feeding tube, which they put in through her mouth. And she started off with 2 milliliters, the equivalent of 2 milliliters of milk on that day. And they saw how she tolerated it, and then slowly the plan was to increase the milk supply until she was on full feeds, and then they'd switch over to breastfeeding or bottle feeding. And so I was exclusively pumping, which is a lot of work. And if you have any questions about that, I can message you about that, because I had a pretty tight schedule. It was a lot of hard work, but I had a lot of success with it. And my daughter was in the critical care unit for her first 2 weeks. In the critical care here in France, where I had her, the babies were considered so fragile, parents were not allowed to stay. So I wasn't allowed to be by her side for the first 2 weeks, which in the end maybe was best for myself, because I was in such bad physical shape that the lack of sleep you get in the hospitals, the amount of walking just to get to and from the room where they pump, and there was only one bathroom for all parents, and it was very far away, very hard for me to walk to. I think it would have slowed down my personal recovery. So after 2 weeks, my daughter got moved up to the post-surgical floor, and the reason she got moved up was because she was no longer on morphine, and she was able to tolerate, I think we're up to about 40 milliliters of milk per feed, and she would throw up every once in a while, but she was doing well. One thing I was not prepared for my first week was that with imperforated anus, there are a lot of conditions that are often associated with imperforated anus. So they did testing for every single one of those potential associations. And when I heard day 1, her diagnosis, I thought it was terrible news, but I understood it, and I wasn't prepared to hear there may be other problems with my daughter. So day 5, the doctors sat us down and they told us about her other diagnoses. So she had 2 holes in her heart and some other heart anomalies that were not serious. Luckily, the holes closed on their own in 2 months' time. They thought she might have had hip dysplasia, and they also were worried that she was brain damaged, so they had to do some MRIs. And they just kind of like dropped that bomb in one meeting, one very casual meeting, like it was nothing. And it was very hard to hear and to understand, and plus I'm English speaking and I live in France, so everything was being explained in French, which is my second language, and it was hard for me to understand. So yeah, then we moved up to post-surgical floor, which was amazing. That's where we got really close with the nursing staff. I had my own private room with my daughter. I was able to sleep with her and move in. and that's where I learned how to take care of her colostomy. I learned how to bathe her. I learned skincare. I learned what would be the best for my daughter, specifically for feeding. For us, my surgeon was adamant. She only wanted my daughter on breast milk. And as my daughter didn't have the suck reflex when she was born, we had to teach her. So we had these special pacifiers, soothers, whatever you call them, that they stimulate the sucking reflex, and they're scented with vanilla, and my daughter responded really well to those. And then in France, you only get 10 weeks of maternity leave. So by the time we were talking about going home from the hospital and my daughter was starting to eat, it was almost time for me to go back to work. So we decided to exclusively bottle feed, and I would pump only for my daughter's feedings. So she learned how to eat with the bottle, and I was on this rigorous pumping schedule. And she stayed in the hospital for 6.5 weeks. Her situation was different. We had to stay a longer time because of her complications with her colon atresia, the large intestine issues. It slowed down her ability to digest, and she didn't gain weight quickly. So the biggest thing was they needed her eating and gaining weight, and we hit this like really uneventful 3 weeks where she just wasn't eating a lot, and she was just maintaining the same weight, and she just really needed more time. Everything with my daughter is in her timing, and I just had to give up full control and just be grateful for the day and accept where she was today. And that was it. I'm trying to think of any other hospital stories. By the time we got up to post-surgery floor after 2 weeks, she was off all painkillers, and she was quite comfortable. And yeah, that was the first round of life in the hospital. The day we got to go home was spectacular and scary, as you're going home with the baby with a colostomy bag, but it's definitely a well-earned and well-imagined day.